Alright, today's video is going to be pretty geeky and nerdy. I'm going to share with you how I expose D-Log Pocket 4 footage to get the least amount of noise possible. I've been testing this camera for the last couple of weeks and also comparing it to the Pocket 3 D-Log M footage. And I noticed that this camera produces significantly more noise when using the D-Log profile compared to Pocket 3 D-Log M profile. The main reasons for that is because one, this camera uses a higher megapixel sensor. More megapixels means smaller overall pixels, means less light gets into those pixels, means more noise. And also D-Log is significantly more demanding from the sensor than D-Log M, because D-Log M is not a proper log profile. It's basically a Rec. 709 profile with less contrast and saturation. But D-Log is significantly more flexible when it comes to pushing and pulling exposure. So you can basically slightly overexpose the shot, underexpose the shot, and then in post-production fix the exposure without losing too much information. Whereas with D-Log M, you are more constrained because the dynamic range from that camera is significantly, inferior to the D-Log Pocket 4 footage. So basically, we can use that to our advantage to eliminate noise as much as possible with a very well-known technique called ETTR, which is basically exposing to the right, exposing brighter than necessary, and then bringing down the exposure in post-production. I've been using this technique for years now with my mirrorless cameras to basically eliminate the noise in camera as much as possible. And today I'm going to show you how to basically use it with the Pocket 4 to get the absolute best results. Alright, so first of all, for those of you who don't know what ETTR is and how it works, here is a quick tutorial. So noise usually lives in the shadows. No matter what camera you're going to use, you will see noise in the shadow area of the frame. So if you can somehow illuminate these shadows, you will be able to eliminate the noise to some degree at least. So option number one would be to bring lights with you and physically illuminate the scene, the shadows basically, to eliminate noise. But that's not practical when vlogging like this, for example. You're not gonna carry lighting equipment with you and then, basically light every scene. It's not really that practical. And then option number two would be to push the exposure slightly brighter than necessary in camera to illuminate the shadows, and that will eliminate the noise. And then basically to set the exposure correctly, you will bring down the exposure in post-production. And the only reason you can do that with the D-Log profile on the Pocket 4 is because it has more dynamic range to work with compared to D-Log M on the Pocket 3. So again, you can slightly overexpose the shot, underexpose the shot, and be able to recover a lot in post-production. The tricky part is to find the sweet spot between overexposing the shot and then retaining important highlight information. Because the more you're going to push the exposure to the right, the more you're going to overexpose the shot in camera with the Pocket 4 or any camera out there, the more you're going to blow out important information in the highlights. And from my experience, this sweet spot is somewhere between +1 to +1.7 stops, depending on the lighting conditions. So right now, for example, I'm using +1.7 stops of overexposure with the EV compensation because the lighting is flat. It's cloudy at the moment, everything is really flat, really compressed, so I can push the exposure slightly brighter than necessary without really crashing lots of highlight information in the background. And honestly, I don't really care if you can see the clouds in here and whatnot. I care about if you can see me properly, my t-shirt, and maybe some of the details here in the shadows. But if you're shooting in sunny condition where you have a high contrast between shadows and highlights, you would want to reduce that because then you will basically clip highlight information significantly quicker. And I would recommend starting somewhere around +1 EV and then maybe switch to +1.3 EV if you want to, basically eliminate more noise in the shadows. Personally, I would use +1.3 EV because for me, the highlight information is not as important as seeing the distracting noise in the shadows. Now, if you're going to do manual exposure, it's going to be a bit trickier to properly overexpose the shot because you will basically have to monitor the exposure yourself and not rely on the EV compensation of the camera. But I would highly recommend setting the ISO to 400, which is basically the best ISO of the camera, and this will give you the widest dynamic range performance from the Pocket 4 and also the least amount of noise possible. And then you will expose the shot either with shutter until it looks slightly overexposed to your eyes. You will have to kind of practice and get familiar basically with the display of the Pocket 4. And you can also glance at the EV icon in here. If it's at plus Two, in here, this looks way too bright to my eyes right now. So I would honestly put it somewhere around here. This looks bright enough, but not like completely blown out. But honestly, I would highly recommend using ND filters with your Pocket 4. These ones are from Freewell. Link is going to be down below. These filters will basically give you that cinematic motion blur effect, and then you will basically set the shutter to double the frame rate. In my case, it's 1/50, and then you will take out an ND filter, let's say ND 128. You put it on the camera, and you will basically swap ND filters until the shot looks slightly overexposed by about 1 to 1.7 stops. All right, now let me show you how flexible D-Log actually is, and also how to manipulate your exposed to the right D-Log footage in post-production, basically. So I'm using DaVinci Resolve, and here are my project settings. I'm using DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate for my timeline color space, and then Rec 709 Scene for my output color space because I'm grading on a MacBook display. And here I have a very simple node tree consisting of an IDT and also ODT. Basically, it takes me from D-Log to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, and then Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. As you can see, this is the IDT, D-Log, D-Gamut, DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, and then the DRT or ODT takes me from DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. By the way, this DRT is completely free. Link is going to be down below. And I am mainly going to work between these two nodes to work in the DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate color space to be able to squeeze the most amount of information from this shot, basically. Now, if you are using a different software to color grade, you will probably not have an IDT and ODT. You will probably use the official LUT from DJI, which is totally fine, by the way, as long as you're going to do the majority of the work underneath the LUT or before the LUT, basically, to work in the widest dynamic range possible, widest color space, to again squeeze the most amount of detail possible from your D-Log Pocket 4 footage. Right now, in here between the IDT and ODT, I have like a balance node to adjust the exposure, and I'm using like a simple DCTL plugin from Pixel Tools. It's basically like a color correction tool. It has all the necessary tools you need, like exposure, contrast, saturation, white balance, all in one window, basically. But you honestly can use the HDR global wheel in here to adjust the exposure, or you can use the offset wheel in the primaries. Color wheels works pretty much the same way. I'm just used to using this tool because it is significantly quicker. If you are interested to check out Pixel Tools DCTLs, which I highly recommend, by the way, link is going to be also down below. Now, this shot, I actually went crazy. I overexposed this by 3 stops on purpose, just to show you how much detail this profile has. And as you can see, this shot is completely like overexposed, blown out. You pretty much barely can see my skin tones. You can barely see the background. But check this out. I'm gonna go to my balance node in here. I'm gonna use the exposure slider, and I'm gonna go down and start recovering information back. And look at this beauty. I mean, I do have some parts in here. This is completely blown out. I cannot recover this information. But look at my skin. Barely any artifacts. In here, also I have some information that is clipped, but that's like specular highlights. But the majority of my skin tones looks fantastic. Also the background, I don't see any significant artifacts, except for the like specular highlights. Even this white line in here is somewhat okay and not really blown out. And also if I'm gonna look at my t-shirt, which is black, this will have, you know, like more noise artifacts and whatnot. As you can see, there's barely any noise. There is some in here, but it's so little, I can barely see it. Looks very clean, and I'm pixel peeping on purpose. So that's basically how powerful is D-Log. Again, I would not recommend overexposing by 3 stops. I think it's a bit too much because you will, you know, blow out highlights significantly quicker, but I would, as a minimum, overexpose by about 1 stop or like 1.7 stops if I'm filming in cloudy conditions. And just for example, here I have a shot that I exposed properly with like 0.0 EV compensation. So that's basically proper exposure according to DJI, basically. And one thing that I can see here right away is noise. Like if I'm gonna go in here, look at this noise. In the shadows, we can see significantly more artifacts, and then with the overexposed by 3 stops shot, more noise in here. And if I'm gonna look again at my t-shirt, Now the noise is more distracting. As you can see, it is significantly more distracting, and I will probably have to add noise reduction in DaVinci Resolve to remove this, because to me at least, it is distracting. Now here I have the same shot in the same scene, same lighting, but I overexpose this also by 3 stops. I'm going to apply the grade that I've made in here to this clip, and as you can see, boom, this is a bit too much. So I'm gonna bring it up to like in here. And first of all, look how much cleaner this shot is. Like, I'm gonna zoom again to the same location. No noise. I mean, there is some grain, like some noise, but it is not this. Like, there's a huge difference between this noise, distracting, annoying, and then this noise. Beautiful and clean. And then also, let's look at my t-shirt in here. No noise. Clean. I mean, I can see some minor artifacts, but it's nothing like this in here. Here I can see significantly more. All right, so as you can see, implementing the ETTR technique with the Pocket 4 is fairly easy. It's not too difficult if you kind of know what you're doing. I would say if you're using automatic exposure settings with this camera, set the EV compensation to about +1.3, +1.7. Usually it works good in most lighting conditions. And then basically reduce the exposure in post-production, which is fairly easy to do. And this will significantly, as you saw throughout this video, reduce the noise when filming in D-Log with this camera. Now, if you're going to film with manual exposure settings, I would highly recommend to keep the ISO at 400 as much as possible to reduce the noise. And then ideally, you would set the shutter to double the frame rate and only expose basically with ND filters. If you wanna check out the ND filters that I'm using, link is going to be down below. But with manual exposure settings, you will have to kind of practice and get familiar with the camera, because you don't have proper exposure tools to like monitor whether you're overexposed by 1 stop, 2 stops, 3 stops and whatnot, because you don't have zebras, you don't have waveforms, you just have the EV meter, but it's not really that accurate, at least in my opinion. So yeah, anyhow, hopefully this video helped you. Hopefully you're gonna get much better results now from the Pocket 4. And yeah, I guess I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye.